Hi everyone, and welcome to Scale Up Your Business. Week in and week out, I'm going to bring you the world's leading experts on business growth and entrepreneurial success. And as I always say, when I bring these amazing guests on the show, you are going to get a heap of value. How important is mindset in business?
You are going to descend to the level of your preparation.
I was so busy today. You were busy doing the wrong stuff.
I will be of service to small business owners till my final breath.
And the question is, can you get your brand everywhere?
Be grateful, be brave, have faith, and show up. Welcome to Scale Up Your Business. Okay, hello everybody. It's Nick here again for another live streaming episode of Scale Up Your Business. And as always, I've got an amazing guest. I've been looking forward to this. We've been trying to organize this for so long. And I'll tell a little bit of a story about that in a second. But Kara Goldin, welcome to Scale Up Your Business.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Great to have you here. So Kara is the founder and CEO of Hint, and that is an award-winning, well, what would you call it? It's flavored water. What else would you call it?
It's water that just tastes better. And it's just fruit and water, and that's it. No sweeteners in it.
That's the cool thing, right? So here's the funny story, right? So sometimes when people come on the show, it takes a little bit of time to get our teams together and booking and all that sort of thing. So Kara, very generously sent a whole box of her water, of Hint water. I think it was November, maybe December. I can't remember. And of course, it got drunk in my house because I've got a 9 and a 6-year-old daughters, and they loved it. So it's got the stamp of approval already.
And we're not in the UK yet, but we're getting a lot of, we had plans prior to the pandemic to get over there. We really wanted to produce as locally as possible. So we were in the midst of looking at that, and then Brexit and, all kinds of things going on.
It's crazy.
Right. So, but we will get there, and we're getting a lot of pull because there really isn't anything quite like it outside of the US.
It's a really great product, and I enjoyed it. As it didn't last long enough, and I didn't get to. Well, actually, I tried every flavor, but I had people taking it off me, little ones. That's it.
Thank you.
A little bit more about you, though. So you're also the author of a book called Undaunted, which we're going to talk about today, which is overcoming doubts and doubters. So I want to talk a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey in that respect. Active speaker, writer, and you're also the host of your own podcast, which is the Kara Goldin Show, which you interview founders, entrepreneurs, and other disruptors. I love that. Cool. So let's get into it. So welcome, and a little bit of your backstory, because I've already done a little bit of your kind of, you went to Arizona State, and I know all these kind of things, but take us through your entrepreneurial journey to kick things off.
Yeah. So I went to university in Arizona. I grew up in Arizona, and then ended up wanting to be a journalist. And I moved to New York, tried to get a job with a publication called Fortune. They wouldn't hire me. So I took a job. I got a job with in the same building with Time magazine, and a couple years later was recruited out of there to go and work at a sort of later stage startup. We didn't really know that term back then, but called CNN. And so I was there with Ted Turner still kind of running around and screaming down the hallway. It was a lot of fun. And then I moved to Silicon Valley, and that's when I had been following this guy, Steve Jobs. And, it's funny. I don't think very many people I knew were kind of following him that weren't in tech, but I was really impressed with that he had made this beautiful machine when everything prior to this Apple machine in my mind was just this ugly, grayish kind of gross machine. And suddenly there was this cute little apple on this machine. It was simple. It was beautiful, graphically interested. And he was kind of the only person that I sort of knew that lived in Silicon Valley. So I thought, I wonder if I can go get a job at Apple. And then I thought, they'd never hire me because I don't have tech experience. But I had heard about a little startup that was doing shopping. And I thought, I don't know, maybe I could just get a job as an executive assistant or something. I don't know. So I cold called the guy that I saw when I did a little search. This is even before Google. So it was not that easy to go and do search. And just offered to take this guy to coffee. And he said, well, what do you do? And I said, well, I just moved here from CNN and from New York, but working for, CNN and Time. And he said, you work for CNN? And he said, oh, come in, right? So
CNN was because you said it was like, not really a startup, but it was relatively early.
It was the early 90s, but it was still kind of this hot thing that was sort of disrupting, national news,
Well,
right?
media back then was pretty cool. I mean, what's interesting, right, is we had similar backgrounds. So my background was media with News International for quite a long time.
Right. So you,
In the 90s too, actually, 90s and 2000s. But yeah, back then, any media brand, sort of before digital really took off, was kind of cool, wasn't it? It's like, if you
yeah,
were working
it
for one
was.
of them, it was like, it was the hottest ticket in town.
So yeah, exactly. And, I mention it because it, working for a brand, I mean, that was like the first time my dad used to say, brands matter. And that was the first time when, I mean, it didn't matter. He didn't really even ask me what I did at CNN. And I was in business development and sales, but it was fascinating to me because just the brand of CNN got me that coffee date, right? And so then we started talking and he was explaining this product. He had worked at Apple and there were basically 5 guys in the company and they were doing this CD-ROM shopping thing. And he was explaining it and I thought, oh, it's really interesting. You're going to put a bunch of catalogs that I'm a catalog shopper. You're going to put a bunch of them on the disc. And then I remember sitting here looking at him thinking, okay, how do you make money though? And he said, well, we haven't really figured that out yet. And I
These
said,
days, that doesn't matter, right?
wait,
We were talking offline about, Clubhouse doesn't make any money. It's now worth
yeah,
$1 billion. So
that was my first taste of Silicon Valley, where I said, just incredible people. Ideas can come from anywhere. And I said, wait, you don't know how to make money? Here I'd been. Ted Turner really cared about money, right? And it was and Time Magazine really cared about money. And all of a sudden, I'm like, this is gold. Like here are these 5 guys in an office,
wasn't
and
that weird though? Because I'm really old school, right? Like I
yeah,
get involved in profitable cash flow generative
totally.
businesses. I'm not really a tech guy, I've been involved in it, but that must have been unusual. I mean, you can sort of see it, but you must have challenged it quite a bit in your own mindset at that point, just to kind of feel comfortable there? Like,
Well, when I was challenging it, that's when, they started a couple of their investors were in the room when I was asking. I said, "Yeah, you guys still haven't figured out how to make money, but it seems really cool." And at that point, this guy Ted Leonsis, who was he was at America Online and he was he was an investor in this company called Two Market, that was, exactly the 5 guys out of Apple. And he said, maybe you should hire her because she actually cares about money and money would be a really good thing. And I said, so what would I do exactly? And they said, well, you could actually go out to the catalogers. And I said, oh, like I could go and meet people from the Gap and J. Crew. And I mean, that sounds like an awesome job. And I didn't really think that they would hire me, to be honest with you, because I thought, who would hire me? I mean, I have no experience. I have no idea what I'm doing. And I remember getting my offer letter. And in the offer letter, there was, the salary and the bonus and all that kind of stuff. I was going to be making more money than I had made in New York. But all of a sudden, I like looking into the details. My husband is a brand new intellectual property attorney. And he looks at it and he said, they're giving you equity. And I said, what do you mean? Like, what's equity? And he said, I don't know. I mean, I know what equity is, but he said, you've got equity for pennies in this company. And I said, so that's crazy. And he said, yeah, I mean, if the company does well, you'll do well, but if it doesn't do well. So anyway, America Online acquired us 6 months later. And with the acquisition, I mean, I just didn't even know what any of the stuff meant, but I just knew that I was learning and having fun. And suddenly I was given this channel called shopping. And they said, do exactly what you've been doing at Two Market and continue to go out and try and charge people money. And really what you're doing is you're teaching people how to actually bring their catalog online. America Online was a private service, so it was faster than some of the other, offerings that were out there. And 7 years later, I'm running this $1 billion business. But I mean, so many stories from there. Some of them I share in the story. Some of them
no,
were
well,
actually
let's pause, I
cut.
think,
But
because we want to go into
yeah,
the next phase after that. But
yeah,
there's some interesting things in that. So you ended up with a channel and a check, let's call it that, right, at that point,
yeah.
which is awesome, right? And 6 months. I mean, one of the things I talk a lot about is because people ask about how do you become successful in business? And I say, ultimately, it takes the mix of 4 things, right? It takes skill set. You need to be able to offer value in some way, whatever that is. It might be in a domain. It might be like sales and marketing. But you need to be able to add value. You need to have really good mindset. So you need to believe that you can achieve pretty much anything. You need to have a good network or connection, or certainly be around that. That whole proximity is power. And you need to have good timing. Right? Timing's the one that's a bit odd, but that's often about just being curious and present and aware. And it sounds like all of those things kind of came together for you in that one.
Well, I mean, the only piece that I would say, I guess I didn't really have in there was the network. So,
You had the brand, I
something
suppose,
I
instead.
talked
You had the credibility behind you of this cool thing, but that was it, yeah?
Yeah, well, and I think what's interesting, I mean, 2 Market wasn't a brand, right? And in America Online at the time, there was some of these services, CompuServe, Prodigy. I mean, they were number 3 for a while. I mean, we were not, and then there were lots of like Yahoo and Excite and all these other companies were coming into play. So we had plenty of competition. We had plenty of, we were sort of the underdog initially. But what I learned is that actually your ability to just kind of pick up the phone and talk to people and actually get something done. But also, I mean, one of the stories I share in the book is one with Mickey Drexler, and he was the CEO of the Gap at the time. And all my friends who are working at the Gap, I'm in my 20s, right? They're all working at the Gap, slugging it away, and suddenly I'm like, yeah, I just got a meeting with Mickey Drexler. They're like, how do you get a meeting with Mickey Drexler? I'm like, I don't know. And they're like, what are you going to say? And I said, I'm going to teach him about online and and I had no idea really. I mean, you have to be okay, I think, also with going into the unknown a little bit and being a little uncomfortable. I mean, there was a little part of me that said, if I'm an idiot, I mean, Mickey might throw me out of the office. But one of the stories I share in my book is one that I still think back on where, Mickey was looking at my computer and he had been pitched so many different internet companies, I'm sure, and different ways for him. They didn't have a store for the Gap at the time, but for whatever reason, I made it seem simple to him, and I was willing to spend a lot of time with him, really sharing, okay, the difference between us and them is that we're a closed service, so things are going to be faster, and but you guys actually have a lot of work to do. And I'll never forget Mickey saying, what do you mean, like, we're the Gap, and I said, yeah, but you guys don't actually do the back end. I mean, you don't do individual orders. You do bulk orders into your stores. Doing an individual order is really hard. And he's like, what do you know about our, like, why do we need
Where did you become good at, influence?
I don't know. I mean, again, I think what I've always been able to do is kind of break it down into some simple way, but it's this very complicated. I'm sure you've been in these situations before where with these senior people, you you understand that they don't really understand, but you run the risk of really kind of assassinating your situation, right? If you say, "Oh, Mickey, you're so come on."
But the reason I asked that question, right, there's 2 parts to it in my mind, right? There's one about how do you make the complex simple, right? Which is a skill in
Mhm.
its own right, because lots of people try and do the opposite, or they're not aware they do the opposite. And then the best definition of influence that I've ever heard, I don't even know where this came from, but it's not the ability to convince someone they should believe something, it's to convince someone that you actually believe it, right? And if you think about that, that level of
Yeah,
conviction can
yeah,
really make a shift.
yeah, and, I don't know, maybe being the last of 5 kids, maybe I had to have that, like, I
Well,
was
I was reading your
that
story,
might be
it says at 14 you were in a local toy store in Scottsdale, Arizona, and you were doing buying for the whole store at 14, like,
yeah,
so
good
someone,
times.
even
Yeah.
back then, you obviously had this ability.
Well, it's funny, I was actually explaining this to my 15-year-old son the other day when I brought him into a local craft store in San Francisco, and bringing a 15-year-old boy into a craft store is like, you know, he wants his Fortnite game, he's just like, "Oh my god, can we get out of here?" And it reminded me of how I actually got that job at the toy store. My mom used to go into this fabric store, and I just didn't want to be in there anymore. And so there was a toy store next door to the fabric store. So I'd just go in there and just start looking around. And then finally the lady Nancy who was in the toy store said, would you ever want a job? I really need somebody on Sundays to do the cash register. Now you're 14. I don't know about you, but I had like a toy cash register that I used to play with,
Yeah, years
I'm a little
ago.
bit
I'm,
younger.
I look young, but I'm pretty old. Trust me.
But
I know
like
what
I
you're
was,
talking
I
about.
mean, I hadn't even when I was 14, I guess maybe I stopped playing when I was like 8 or 9, but I thought, "Oh, I get to I get to take money from people." I mean, this is when people actually didn't use credit cards as much. And so I just thought it would be really fun. And I remember getting this job on Sundays, and I had 4 older brothers and sisters who were all off working and making money. And I was so proud of myself that I had this Sunday job. And I remember my dad said to me, did they ask you for an ID? I mean, do they know that you're not 16? And I said, I don't have an ID. I mean, I don't have a driver's license. And he said, well, that's true. Did they ever ask you? And I said, no. And so suddenly, and he just kind of thought it was funny at first. And I did too. And I thought, I don't know. And maybe at some point they'll just tell me to leave. Right. And that's when she realized, I mean, look, I'm a kid and I'm in the store talking to adults about what kids want. I totally got it. I got the situation. So people would walk in and they'd be stuck and I'd say Legos and oh gosh, of course, Legos. And there was anyway, it was a lot.
I like to unpack these things, you see, because there's often lots of stuff that, I mean, I'm sure when you write a book, you kind of reflect a lot anyway, don't you? So there's a
Yeah,
lot of things that come together. I'm in the process of doing it now. But
it's
I just
totally.
I read that story and I thought, yeah, it's interesting because a lot of the stuff that, this successful entrepreneurs have different patterns and programming that happen around them.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's parents, sometimes it's experiences, it's definitely environment. And I just read that part of your story and I thought that's interesting because someone, even at that age, you were doing stuff that not most 14-year-olds are doing that level of responsibility.
Yeah, and that was and then Nancy, she was just getting divorced actually, and she was a single mom, and I remember her, asking me to take on more hours, which I would after school, and then finally she said, "Would you wanna come with me to the toy show and help me do some of the buying?" And she started talking to me, not even really knowing she was probably even doing this, but as she was thinking about different products, she was also talking about margins and markups and all of these things that I hadn't learned in school, right? And I'd go home and I was just sitting at the dinner table with my dad, who was also in marketing, but also product development for a food company. And he said, "That's fascinating that you're learning all of these things, and good for you." But again, it was just sort of it was fun and I was making a little bit of money and I just thought it was great, but I had no idea when I was in it that I was that I didn't sit here even after that job say, "Okay, one day I'm going to go and be an entrepreneur." I think I actually said I'm not going to run a toy store. I'm pretty sure after
Well,
that.
you probably wanted your Sundays back to do cool stuff, but
Exactly.
a lot of entrepreneurs don't realize the stuff that they have. Like as I said, it's the number of people I interview and they casually remark on sort of Sunday lunch conversations or dinner conversations with parents where they're surrounded by different conversations, entrepreneurial conversations, or the opposite sometimes. Like sometimes it can be the struggle that they witness their parents going through, and
Yeah.
then that sparks. Both of them are interesting, I suppose, paradigms. But I always like to unpack that a bit just to sort of see where the foundations are, in terms of things.
No,
But
it's so true, and I think to your point when you're writing a book, I mean, I this was my journal for 4 years, and after I was doing a ton of public speaking and people would ask, the Q&A at the end, and they'd ask some questions about, my journey, and I would basically go back to my room after these conversations and start journaling because I thought maybe even for my own boredom, I thought, I don't want to tell the same story over and over again. But instead, there were maybe 3 or 4 of these stories. And then as I started thinking about it, maybe there's 8 of these stories, 9 of these stories. So this journal was actually over 600 pages when I decided, gosh, there's so many things in here that could help a lot of people know that it's gonna be okay, particularly for entrepreneurs, but also other people who are thinking about being an entrepreneur. I've always kind of been challenged by people labeling entrepreneurs as these fearless risk takers or unicorns versus failures. And I've always thought the step in between, maybe it's their journey, maybe it's their childhood. Some people have, were probably born entrepreneurs. I don't know if I was, but I think along the way, I learned a lot of things. I also, even people have said to me in about their own life that maybe there's some things that they shouldn't have done that. And I'm always the first person to say, actually, nothing was a waste of time, right? It's all, if you believe that the dots eventually connect, which I do, then this is all part of the learning. And the fun is actually figuring out, even where you failed or where you had challenges or where you were really scared, and maybe you're not so scared of those things anymore. What were those things that brought you to today?
Did you
And
always believe that? I mean, you said just a second ago about the dots will come together. Did you always believe that?
No, I don't think so, but as I look back over time, I think that it was there were so many pieces along the way where, I was living that way, but I didn't know
No,
it,
in
right?
the struggle, you don't notice it. But the point around, serendipity or things coming together in that respect, do you believe that more now in hindsight?
Totally. And
Yeah.
one of the stories I share in the book is one where, it's probably one of the most challenging times at Hint. We had a lot in building the company, but one of the more challenging times is a huge uptick in our company history when we got into Starbucks nationwide in 11,000 locations throughout the US. We thought we were so smart, got all the understanding up front of sort of what was success. After a year and a half, we got an email, then a phone call with the new buyer who shared that we were going to be removed from the case. And my immediate response was, oh, you must have another brand that you're talking about, because we're doing 3 times what you told me was success. And she said, no, we changed strategy and we're going to be putting food in the case. We're so sorry. And I remember hanging up the phone, and I don't cry very often, but I cried because I had investors. I had 6 months of inventory, and I was sharing this with a friend at that moment. And I remember thinking, the reason I care about this is because it's 40% of my overall business. I wouldn't care if it wasn't 40% of my overall business, but it was a big number, right? And so that's when I said, okay, I got to figure out what to do with my inventory. How do I talk to my investors about this? And I was still in thinking mode. And that's when we got a phone call from Amazon. They were launching, another Seattle company. They were launching their direct to consumer business. The first thing out of the buyer's mouth from Amazon, he said, I love your product. I buy it every morning with my latte from Starbucks. And I didn't even see it then, but that's when he ordered a truckload. We became one of the number one products on Amazon. And about a year later, that's when I really realized that, okay, it wasn't great what happened with Starbucks. I'm not really thrilled about components of it, but I always remembered that that's what that Amazon buyer said. And then ultimately, a year into the Amazon relationship, we realized another really important piece, which was that we weren't getting the data that we really wanted. And then I realized that I wasn't getting data out of any of my retailers, and that basically they would wholesale my product and then they would own inventory, and it was their inventory. It wasn't my inventory anymore. And so they didn't feel that it was my product anymore. Even though I might have thought it was my brand, they felt that they had the rights to sort of own it. So why should I get the emails? So I launched my own direct to consumer business on drinkhint.com 7 years ago. That's 55% of our overall business today. And it's like whether it's a circle or a triangle, I haven't figured it out, but I go back to Starbucks, right? And I think those are the dots. It all connected.
Yeah,
And
okay. There's a lot of things in this.
yeah, so there are. And
Let's go back to the phone call, right? The phone call when, 40% of your sales are now compromised,
mhm.
and the tears and all that. What was the lesson in terms of, I want to know timeframes too, because I'm quite curious about these sort of things, but between that phone call and then finding out about Amazon, what was the time frame between that? Do you remember?
About 2 weeks.
Okay, and what was the lesson, in terms of that? Because you must have been thinking, obviously, there's, looking back again is interesting. There must have been something interesting that you thought through that process. Was there, I put too much of my eggs in one basket. I'm never going to do that again. For example, was that one of the things? What was the most
One of
powerful
them.
lesson? What was the
Yeah.
most powerful lesson?
That was up there for sure. But also, and I'll tell you, every one of I'm still the CEO of. I'll always be the founder, but I'm still the CEO of my company, and I think every person who's on my team would share with you that the one thing that is part of my journey is when I see business getting too big from any partner that we deal with, it makes me nervous.
Yeah,
And
okay.
so I think that's a major, major lesson, and one that I didn't realize when I was in it, and I'm so happy I went through it with Starbucks, but that also led to sort of how I managed during the pandemic. And, we had 3 revenue streams coming into the company, not only direct to consumer, but we are still in all of these different retailers, but we also had not 40%, but about 15% of our business in what we call corporate food service. So we've been the largest beverage in Silicon Valley to Google, Facebook, lots and lots of companies throughout the US, but really started in Silicon Valley. And when the pandemic hit, what did people do? They shut down the offices. And so if all of my eggs were in Google or Facebook, right? You can think about this. Maybe you don't have a physical product. Maybe you think that, okay, Facebook changes their algorithm and I'm dust, right? It's the same thing. If you do not have options, then when there's a pandemic, when they cut off your business, you can look at it for supply or whatever it is, then you're screwed, right? And so I learned that super important lesson that almost tanked my business through Starbucks. And I am so thankful for it. And I look back and look at, and I could say to Howard Schultz, I could sit and have a beer with him and say, did it hurt? Did I not love you at the time? It's fine. But I learned a very valuable lesson that ultimately helped me to grow my business.
Yeah, well, most of the best lessons come from pain, and
Right.
more importantly, you get resourceful. Well, you do two things. You either get really resourceful through that, or you run away and hide and hibernate for a period of time. I
And
see
you
both.
freeze. Like the number of people who froze during the pandemic and just said, okay, we're going to hunker down. We're going to cut staff. We're not going to invest. We're not going to grow. I think, again, I look back on my journey and I mean, we're a 15-year-old company too. We've been through the financial crisis. We've been through, lots of different things. The first thing I did when all of our when 15% of our business went away with the corporate food service business, and we immediately figured out that we could put it into our direct to consumer business. Our direct to consumer business has tripled since March. Our overall company sales are up over 50%. I mean, it's been a crazy year. In addition to launching a book, I mean, it's been
Yeah, I was going to say you don't rest, which is good actually. I like that as well. Well, I was going to ask you about the book,
yeah.
so particularly the overcoming doubts and doubters, because that in itself conjures up a lot of different thoughts and questions. What's the overriding message in your book? I mean, obviously there's a lot of them, but what's the one thing that you're really trying to get across?
Yeah, well, I think that the main thing is that people think that these entrepreneurs, and I'm, one of them, they are lucky. They had it all figured out. They're, fearless risk takers. And I've met a lot of entrepreneurs. You've met a lot of entrepreneurs. We all had fears. We all were knowing that there was a chance that we were going to fail. There was also a chance that we were going to succeed. There were hard days along the way. If you talk to any of these entrepreneurs that have been successful, they had fears and failures, and they just kept going. Right? They didn't stop. They figured out a way to keep moving, and so just through my own stories, as I mentioned before, I feel I started to hear after I started public speaking, more people would write to me through social media and say, thank you so much. You helped me in so many ways to figure this thing out, or I don't feel so alone when I have, 45 venture capitalists who have said sorry but no thanks, and things along the way where sometimes you just need to hear somebody else's story to know that you're going to be okay. And so I thought about 2 years ago, I didn't even think of writing a book. I mean, I call myself an accidental entrepreneur. I call myself an accidental author. I knew a few authors, and I had this journal, and I was planning on just taking it to the copy shop and binding it and handing it out to people, because I thought, I think anytime you're in a role where you can help people, and certainly I felt that way with Hint from just hearing from customers say, you've really helped me to drink water. But I started hearing about someone's journey, and you call it mentorship or management or whatever, but I just thought, if I can actually help people to move forward and do something, then that's what I want to do. And that's when I just got the book out there, and I just, the response has been a little overwhelming, and in a really great way, because again, you get it out to bigger audiences and people get to see it more. And I really, even though our product Hint is not in the UK or Asia, I mean, the number of people who have said, I'm just like you. I had this idea and I had this solution, but I wasn't in that industry and I kind of had doubts whether or not I could do it. But then I just kept trying a little bit and getting traction. And sometimes you just need to hear those stories to really know that it's possible.
And how's it been? No, I get that fully. And how's it been different? Because you've got a podcast, which, because I get this in terms of, I get people all the time saying you've changed my life, which is great, right? And
Yeah.
it's one of the gifts that you don't really expect. I didn't expect it. And how have you found it different? Because you've got a podcast and a book. Is the feeling for you different, or is it just a different way of communicating, who you are, your message, how you can help and inspire people?
Yeah, so the purpose, I started about 3 years ago. The purpose was, I felt a little selfish that I would get to meet so many great people, and I mean, honestly, and I would share with my team or share with my friends that I would, get to meet this amazing entrepreneur, and I would share my story. And then I thought, gosh, I wonder if I can start recording these stories. I didn't even call it a podcast initially, and so I would ask people, obviously, if it was okay, and then this whole podcasting thing came about, and I thought, oh, maybe I could get it on there. But my purpose is really to, I mean, I learn so much when I'm talking to people as well, which is a lot of fun for me, but also just getting their stories out there. So just super interesting. How do you feel about things? And did you have those fears? Did you have those failures? And it's a lot of fun. And again, I think it's it's been really rewarding for me as well. But it's also, I think sometimes these stories, sometimes people just don't know that people are interested, which I think is so fascinating. When I ask, I'm always looking for people too that really are not kind of on the typical circuit, right? Where they've got brands or they've got really interesting stories that I know about them. And I just actually recorded, it went live this week. Do you know Pop Chips?
Oh, yeah, we have them here sometimes. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think the
So
girls, I'm thinking back to the snack drawer in the house.
yeah, so Keith Belling, who's a friend of
Yeah.
mine, is the founder of Pop Chips, and, built an amazing brand, and then he left. And how do you feel about building a brand, and then, and now he's doing something else totally different in a different category. It's just, anyway, it's a fascinating,
Now I
uh
wanna ask you that question, you see, but you're gonna say, "Oh, you can't ask me that question." Is that kind of what you're thinking?
well, it's
15 years or whatever it's been,
I don't know.
16 years?
Again, I love what I'm doing, but I'm always so curious, and it really is. I mean, he's got a product called Right Rice. It's rice. It's not chips. It's very different, right? It's a different part of the store, but it's just consumption and all different things. I mean, he had deals with Ashton Kutcher and lots of other, like, would you do influencers again? Like, these are questions that I would just ask you over coffee, right? And again, I would come out of these meetings with like Hamdi at Chobani or, Daniel from Kind, and I would just feel like so privileged, frankly, to be able to have these conversations. And I don't know, I've just always just kind of, as people say, you know, Kara's just funny. She just asks these questions that nobody really asks. And again, I don't try and put people on the hot seat. I really try and get them to kind of think about things. And anyway, I
No, I
just,
get it. Successful people are curious, right?
yeah,
And by
just
that
so
they're curious not because they necessarily have to have their voice being heard. They genuinely want to learn from others. And a lot of the time it's about asking the questions that other people don't ask. You
yeah,
know,
I mean,
I ask stupidly deep questions sometimes, and some people find it really annoying. So I'm sort of a bit curbed on it. But the reality is, I like to know the psychology behind what makes people successful, right? So a lot of
yeah,
the stuff I
just
do
say, yeah,
is all that. So and interestingly, we have and on that, because we're going to start to wrap up soon, we have got a question that's come through from someone out there watching this in
yeah.
the social media world. So Jim Parker has come in and said, what drove or pushed you to succeed? Were you pulled by your dreams or pushed by your circumstances? Quite a good question, actually.
Really interesting. So I gave up drinking. My backstory was I gave up drinking diet soda, Diet Coke in particular, when I had gained a bunch of weight over the course of actually 3 pregnancies at the time. I left my tech job. And, you know, sometimes when you take a break from working, I was taking a couple of years off and enjoying being a mom. And that's when I thought, I'm going to get in shape and really try and figure out what I'm going to do next. But I wanted to really get healthy. And that's when I was paying attention to the food, but I wasn't paying attention to the drinks. And one day when I saw the ingredients in my diet soda, that's when I thought, huh, doesn't seem that great. Why am I putting it into my body? I'm going to just test it and see what would happen. I was shocked when I started drinking water in place of my diet soda. And 2.5 weeks later, I lost over 20 pounds. I also had
Wow.
terrible adult acne and my energy
This was just
level.
diet soda, as in stuff that would be generally considered zero calorie stuff, like
Exactly, and
aspartame.
at the time it was 10 calories. They hadn't perfected it down to 10 to 0 calories, but I was shocked, and then I started asking these questions, always curious, but I thought, "Why would diet allow me to get healthy?" I mean, not get healthy, right? Why
Yeah,
would
yeah,
you
yeah.
get up? And and I was just curious, and so I started doing all kinds of research and then realized that, you know, I just didn't I had thought that the word diet meant health. I still think about this all the time when you're in, you know, probably ask your kids, like, if you take a vocabulary quiz, right? The word diet is not really a positive term, right? It's something that you have to do, right? Versus somewhere along the way, maybe in the case of diet soda, it's when you're a teenager, here, instead of regular soda, have diet. And that was me. I got hooked on
It's a
diet.
misconception of weight control. So when people think of diet or going on a diet, most people go on a diet because they feel they have, you know, something in terms of their weight that they want to
Totally.
manage,
And
as opposed to lifestyle or something like that.
how we've been fooled along the way, I became so curious about this concept. Also, this drink called vitamin water had just
Yeah,
landed
okay.
on
I've
the,
had that.
and it was over, I mean, it was crazy. The first vitamin water had over 300 calories in it. It was higher than a soda. That was never my drink, but I would talk to friends and I'd say, "So, why do you think that's healthy? I'm just curious." And they said, "Because it says water and it says vitamins."
Yeah,
And I
there
said,
you
"So you
go.
don't even read the labels?" "Nope, I don't,
The
because I."
power of marketing.
Right. And so the net of it is that that I was so fascinated by this what had happened to me, that's when I thought, "Gosh, the reason I don't drink water is it's boring." And so I started slicing up fruit and throwing it in water in my kitchen. And when I went to the local store to look for a ready-made product, they didn't have it. I looked and looked and looked for almost a year, and I could not find this product that I wanted. Everything was like vitamin water or these other drinks with sweeteners in it. And so I thought it would be really fun if I could develop a product while I was looking for a job. This was like, we didn't even call it a side hustle 15 years ago. That term was not yet here. But I thought if I can just go get it on the shelf, I could actually help a lot of people get healthy. And so my purpose was not to start a beverage company. That was the tool to actually
You
help,
just identified a problem that was actually
right?
a problem
I
that you wanted to
identified
solve
a
for
problem.
yourself, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I thought it'd be really freaking cool if I could help people. And that was it. And that today is still, I mean, there was nothing called purpose-driven companies or mission-driven companies. It was that people would say, "Oh, that's so cool that you started a beverage company." And I'd be like, "Oh, I guess." I mean, I just never really thought about it that way. But I thought if I can actually, and from day one of getting the product on the shelf, I started hearing from consumers. They would write me. I never wrote somebody an email saying, "Oh, I love your product." I complained about stuff, right? And called customer service, but I was never the person. And I thought, this is so crazy. People are writing to me and saying that it's, an amazing product. I mean, that's crazy. And I thought, if I mean, I've never been in a position where people are saying, "Thank you so much for I mean, it really wasn't that hard. But I thought, here are these industries out there that are tricking people into believing things. They tricked me. If I can just get in there, if nothing else, it might not work. I might fail, but I'll be a great dinner guest, right? For people who are like, wait, hold on a minute. What did you do? You left Ate Well and then you just decided to go start a beverage company." And I don't know. Wouldn't that be a fun conversation?
Well, I think anyone who does stuff that most people don't do is a fun conversation, right?
Right?
Because most people, and this is my kind of the Matrix red and blue pill piece, which is most people, go and do something they hate, or maybe to put it a little bit softer, are not inspired by. They do it for 20 or 30 years. They kind of realize at the end that perhaps they should have done something different, and then it's too late, right? That's, if you back to when we used to travel to work on subways and things like that, you see, I mean, how miserable does everyone look, right? It's like no one's really smiling.
Well, and I go back and think about this. I mean, people said, "Oh, did you leave tech because it was horrible, too male dominated?" Whatever people were going to say. And I'm like, nope, I actually really liked it. Call me crazy, but I really enjoyed it. But the one thing that I will say, looking back and kind of connecting the dots, is that I was bored. I had been through what's termed a hockey stick, right? And it was
Yep.
super exciting, really, really fun. And then, thank goodness, it didn't sort of tank, but it leveled off. And that to me was just like, okay, now what are we doing? Right? I had just been on this like
Yeah.
wild ride. And I now think back and speaking to a lot of what you're talking about right now, that's when I saw this whole new industry that I really needed to kind of go to back down to the bottom. I had been, one of the youngest vice presidents at AOL, one of the few female vice presidents. And, it was great, but I was willing, and not everybody's willing to do this. I was willing to go down to the bottom and go learn. I would be like knocking on people's doors saying, "Okay, so how do we produce a beverage that doesn't have a shelf life that is, 3 weeks, but instead 6 months? And how do we find a distributor?" I mean, I remember the day that I was calling these things, I'm holding up a cap. I was, I always thought that this was called a cap. In the beverage industry, this is called a closure. It took me like 6.
Really? I always call it a cap, bottle
Right?
cap.
And so, but when you actually call something in an industry by the correct name, you the world opens up for you, right? You're now on the program, right? It's just
You're in the club because you've called it, what's it called? A closure.
it's like,
Oh,
oh, I mean,
not
can
very
you write
inspiring.
a book on this stuff? And I remember just thinking, I've done it. I've made it. And just little victories like that along the way, I'm still smiling 15 years later, right? Where
Yeah.
I look at so many of my friends who are like, maybe I should go launch my own company, or maybe I should go join a board. And I'm always, saying, I mean, you could, but I mean, being an entrepreneur, there's way easier ways to make money. Right there, it's not
You
for
don't do, yeah, entrepreneurship is not necessarily, you don't do it just for the money.
yeah,
It's funny, Jim has come back and said, "That was amazing, your answer, by the way." And he's also said 91% of the population do a job they don't like. And he said that he's in the lucky 9%, and
yeah,
thanks God every day for that. So but you're right. I mean, entrepreneurship, I call it the roller coaster, right? I don't know. It's not my term. It's just what I think it feels like. You have your best day and your worst day often on the same day, right?
totally.
You know
Yeah.
what I mean, right? But you've got to like that. You've got to realize that if you don't enjoy the journey, the destination is not going to make a difference regardless, because the journey is where it all happens, right? In that moment.
And you have to learn to celebrate what you've accomplished too. And I think that that's, another thing that I've learned along the way is that, if you don't do that, and clearly I've talked to entrepreneurs about that. Sometimes I'm the one that reminds them that where were you a few years ago when you really didn't think you were going to be able to get out of a situation, and talk to me about that. I feel like sometimes I'm a therapist for reminding people about those, hard times. And, sometimes you just have to be able to do that. And I think it really is training your mind to be able to do that sort of stuff. So but, even board stuff, that if you join a board, nobody's going to ask you to be on a board unless you've actually got experience. And so then are you really learning anything? Maybe, but maybe not. Maybe you're just
Uh,
actually teaching. And so I don't
You've
know
got to
that.
learn. I mean, my experience of this is you've got to learn, do, teach, then leverage, right? So there's a piece there where you've got to learn to do something somewhere, and then you have to do it, and then you can teach it. But I mean, I know that's not in all cases, but as a model. But what you're expressing tonight, and I listen intently to these things, is you're expressing mindset all the way through this,
Mhm.
right? There's a resilience and a grit, and I think you're obviously very aware of that, but it's come through in every single one of your answers.
Yeah, and I think that people have asked me over the years too, as you have children as well. I mean, I have, 4 Gen Zers, and, now, and I remember when they were really little, when I was launching Hint, and there were days I felt guilty. I thought, "Oh gosh, should I go take a cushy job and make lots of money, and, and what am I teaching them?" And there were times when I'd put them to bed and I'd be back on working, and I remember when my 12-year-old son, it is now 18, but when he was 12, he was watching Sheryl Sandberg on television, and he said, "Mom, I just realized that women aren't CEOs." And I thought, "Oh, great, I gotta go through this with my 12-year-old son now." And he said, "I don't really understand it, because you've been a great CEO." And I said, "Well, thank you. That's really nice." And he said, "Well, I just don't understand. Like, what's the problem?" And I remember the next day he came back from his tennis lesson, and he plays a ton of tennis. And he said, "Why do we separate the girls from the boys' teams? Because there are girls that are better tennis players than boys." And I said, "Maybe you should go work on it." And he said, "I think I will, because it should be based on their abilities, not based on their gender." And again, I never had that conversation with him. I just showed him, and I just went and did it. And there was and again, I think just by actually doing what you love, and just enjoying and smiling. And I mean, I'm working on stuff around clean water in Washington right now. And as he said, I mean, he said to a friend of mine the other day, he said, "What does your mom do?" And he said, I don't really know how to define that, but I think she has a really good time, and she loves taking on the beverage industry." And I thought, "Wow."
Oh, but how cool is that though? Like, that's the impression that you've
And
left
she'll
on him.
and he will be a better human for being able to have seen that
Yeah,
and
indeed.
feel that way, right? And
Everything is about how you show up, right? And that sometimes I know from my experience and also working with lots of different entrepreneurs and business leaders, you sometimes don't realize that in the moment, right?
no,
Because I mean, my daughter my 9-year-old comes up and says the most intelligent, astute questions, observations, really, and
yeah.
I'm like, did you really? Do you notice that?
Yeah.
Right?
No, and they do, they're little sponges. But I'm a huge believer that if you enjoy what you're doing, and they really see that there's passion and there's purpose and all of those things. My 2 out of 4 of my kids were homeschooling. They're in 3 of them are in university, and one's in high school, and they were back here. And I remember my daughter saying to me, "Have you ever managed during a pandemic?" I mean, I'm the CEO of a company, right? That I'm sitting here trying to figure out what life is like. And I said, "No, I never done the pandemic, but I will, because I have to." And she said, "Okay." I was just wondering, was there, and,
How do you
and
answer that?
watching it along the way, and she would, and then, one of the things that I did 2 weeks in, because here we are telling our employees that they're not gonna be sheltering in place because 'cause they're essential workers that need to go into stores, and I said, "Here's your N95 mask that we had left over from the fires in the Bay Area, and here's your gloves and hand sanitizers," and, it was scary, and people, I had employees who were saying to me, "Are you trying to kill me?" And they were serious. I mean, they were, I cared about them, and I didn't know if I was doing the right thing, frankly, but I knew that I had to do what I was doing in order to have enough water on the store shelves and really support the stores. And so I took on a route in Marin County where I live, and I mean, I remember some people saying, "Our CEO is actually taking on a route," and I said, "Just don't get too excited about that, but I'm this is what I'm doing." And I went back to my roots of where I was 15 years ago, primarily because I wanted to make sure that I was doing the right thing for my employees. But I also found that once I was in there in the stores, I started telling our sales team, texting them saying, "Hey, by the way, I'm going into the stores before 7 o'clock in the morning because there's no people, and I feel much safer. And you can do whatever you want, but that's my strategy." And then all of a sudden, people started doing that too. And in some ways, I've never been in the military, but maybe that's the same kind of mentality, that you make sure that your team is set up for success just by going and doing. And there's a lot of different ways, guess, to do it, but I had no
It's
idea.
comes back to it comes as is what I said, it's how you show up. It's often said the whole thing about, how you do anything is how you do everything, right? And that's a
Totally.
sense of it. Um, Respectful of your time because we've been going for about
Thank
50
you.
minutes odd. And I know you've got other stuff to do, but we're going to do a very kind of last couple of questions, if that's all right.
Yeah.
Um, who has been, it's kind of a bit of a quick fire. Who has been the most inspirational person that you have associated with, which maybe has underpinned the success in your career?
So many people along the
Oh, you got
way.
to do one. I'm not going to let you. I'm not going to let you do five, three. You've got to say is there one? It might even not be the one that's the biggest. It might be one that just stands out to you. Might have said a word or something that really kind of made you think differently and change things.
Well, I would say family naturally. I think there's just different people along the way that have said things to me that that have sort of stopped me in my tracks. But another one that I had dinner next to, and uh, is one of the endorsements on my book, is Jamie Dimon, who's JP Morgan Chase. And I think I was probably the only one in the world who didn't know what Jamie looked like prior to sitting down next to him at a dinner. And
Is that right? So you were like talking to this guy and thinking whatever, and
Yeah, and
wow.
truly, it was a dinner in San Francisco that I was invited to, and I knew it was put on by JP Morgan Chase, but nobody was around in my house that night. Everybody was off in their activities, and so I just figured it was like free chicken, right? Well, somebody else is cooking, right? And so I show up at the
And you
dinner.
don't have to feed. Was it 5 children or something like
Yeah,
that?
this very nice man says, "Oh, by the way," I walk in 15 minutes late. He said, "Oh, you're actually next to me." And I said, "Oh, terrific." I sit down and everybody's like trying to get this guy's attention. There was no name tags, and a bunch of Bitcoin guys trying to talk to Jamie. And anyway, he's like, "So what do you do?" I think he was probably trying to avoid their conversations. And I said, "Oh, I run this company Hint." And so we started talking, and he had never heard of it before. Anyway, net of it is uh, by the end of the night, he had heard from a bunch of people who were coming up to me, were Silicon Valley CEOs, saying, "Oh my gosh, do you know how much Hint I drink in my office?" He said, "Where have I been? I mean, why have I not heard of this product?" And I said, "Well, I'll send you a case." And he drops me a card. I stick it in my purse. I didn't even know who it was. And then I get home and I said to my husband, I said, I was just sitting, like, having a full-on conversation about, he had just come back. Jamie had just come back from having cancer, and we were talking about cancer for about 45 minutes. Not even what you think you would be talking to, chairman and CEO of JP, who runs like pretty much the, world
Well,
economic
world's
market.
economics and finances, yes.
And that's when, anyway, that was sort of the beginning. I shot him and, I sent him a case. He was very kind, sent me a note back and said, I think what you're doing and after talking to you last night is really important. And it's your purpose is so clear and your passion is so clear. And I was like, oh, you're just being really nice. And anyway, over the years, I met him about 4 years ago now. Over the years, when I've had any questions about building my business and sort of, do I go right or do I go left? I don't talk to him on a weekly basis, but having those people who you can reach out to them when you have pain points. Do I do a SPAC? Do I raise more money? How do I think about things? And are just so critical. And like you said, that they just say things that are just genius in your mind, right? That are things that you just didn't really think about along the way.
Yeah, having those people, I've had many of those, and I get that from the conversations I have on the podcast too. And I think about my journey the last couple of years, and my knowledge of just stuff, right, just from the conversations has increased. But you have to have those people. I often say that the people who are the most successful are the ones you call sometimes mentors. More often, it's just having those people in your world, right? And they make it a lot more fun.
And what
As
I've
much,
realized too is that, I've met a lot of really, call them famous people. People are just people. And I think that the more you can just be yourself and you just don't I don't know. I've learned it along the way. I mean, I remember when one of our investors, John Legend, called me on the 800 number on our bottle, and I didn't know who John was, and he was explaining. I said, I mean, this is before Chrissy. This is a long time ago. And I said, I'm sure you're very important, but I don't know who you are.
no,
And
I don't even know who John Legend is. He's a singer, isn't he?
yes, yeah.
See, there's gonna be all these people listening to this going, Nick, come on, man. Seriously, you've got to know. But
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because again, still to this day, I mean, it's just again, I don't talk to these people all the time,
you're
but
right, they're people, right? I mean,
they're
and you're right.
people.
And sometimes we can make things like when I was talking to Jesse Itzler last night, really interesting conversation. And he's just a guy, right? He happens
Totally.
to have some success, but he has some really interesting principles that are interesting because of that success. And that's where the learning happens. But he's just a guy. And he wasn't arrogant about anything, just wanted to tell his story and help people.
Yeah, and I think that that's the thing that I've learned too. I mean, they probably have less time, right? That time is the most valuable thing that I've realized about so many people in any different industry. The more success you have, I think that the more time constrained you are, and or at least you feel,
No, it feels like that. I agree. We got one last really hard question. It's a really hard question. You ready?
yeah.
Okay. So when this is all said and done, right? And kind of everything's finished, your life is at that last piece. What are the 5 or so words that are on your tombstone that you want to be remembered by?
So tough.
Told you it's hard. Yeah, so I hate you at the beginning. I said I wasn't going to tell you, but
Yeah.
what's your legacy is really the question. What's the thing that you want to be known for?
Yeah, I think, that I not only tried, but I gave people the ability to realize that they could, right? And
See,
I
good answer. See, good answer. You didn't have to overthink that.
yeah,
Say that again. Say that again.
so that I tried, but I also gave people the ability to know that they could. And that is in whether it's my family, whether it's my friends, whether it's people I don't really know, entrepreneurs, whatever. I think that just by being an example of somebody that could just goes out and does, I think is oftentimes the most underrated thing that allows people to really be happy and ultimately go and do what they should be doing. And I think that's something I think about a lot, and certainly I, want for my kids, and I want, just by helping, right? And trying to um bring people to their best, I think is really how I think about it. And then also I think that the only way you can get there too is by being humble, by being kind, and even talking about Jamie or John or other people that I've had the privilege of being able to talk to. And I just don't think that you can be an asshole, and if I can say that, right?
I know you're
And
allowed to swear, but
yeah,
I want
like,
people to, the reason I ask this question, I want people to, I always like to leave my guests with a lasting point, right?
yeah,
So I like people to, like, because I think the last thing you say is often what's remembered.
yeah.
You know what I
And I
mean?
think that
And it's
it's an important piece of it, that it eventually catches up to you, and I think that that's the most important piece for me, is being able to be a lifter, but also be somebody who is appreciative and kind and grateful.
so thank you. So where
Thanks.
can people find you, Kara? I mean, we've obviously I've got here www.drinkhint.com/scale up.
Yeah, so that is for the website. You can also go to Amazon, Audible to get the book, and then also I'm on Kara Goldin. It's with an I for Golden, all over social media, and hopefully we'll see you on Clubhouse too. Uh,
Yeah, we're gonna do that. So yeah,
I know
we'll
I would
get
love
you. Let me know, because I'll get your details, and then you can kind of let me know when you're coming in.
anytime. I
And
would be privileged to do.
yeah, I'll pull you up on stage. And as I said, we get a couple of thousand people in the rooms of all sorts. I think you'll enjoy it. And I've got a co-host there as well who likes to ask equally challenging questions.
I I've kind of heard it all at this point, especially having, we should do a conversation. I was telling a friend the other day that I've got the whole Gen Zer thing down. I thought I had, since 70% of the workforce are millennials. I thought I had that down, but now spending my last year with my Gen Zers, and I've got two girls and two boys. There's a big difference between the two of
You're
them.
ahead of the curve on me, because I didn't even know what the definitions are anymore. I didn't even know what I am.
Yeah. Well, I got it all down, and very different, but it's a whole other topic that I think is really, really interesting, and what's coming into the workforce and who
Well, that
you're
can be
gonna
your next. That can be
manage.
your next book. There you go. You've
Yeah,
already got it written down.
well, very different, and again, like, it could be a great Clubhouse conversation, but very different than, millennials. Not that millennials are bad, but just different, and they
Yeah.
think differently about things, and anyway, I just think it's fascinating.
Well, I will make sure. Let's connect on that. And when you're popping in, what usually happens is people pop in for a few minutes as long as they need, and then it's great fun. So,
I'm
listen.
excited
Thank you. Thanks for coming on the show. It's been
so
great.
much,
Thanks for the
and
live stream.
thanks for listening, everyone, and hopefully we'll get a chance to connect more.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you.